Hello, listeners. This is Chip Griffin. And before we get started with this week's episode, I wanted to let you know that this is an episode that we recorded in December of 2021 before public serious allegations were made about Chris Noth. It obviously would impact how we perceive some of the specifics of the situation that we discussed, but we felt that the broader points that we raise about agency-client relationships and related issues still applied. So we're going to share the episode with you, but we wanted to make you aware of the timing so that you can understand the context of what we're discussing. So with that, let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
Today we're going to talk about Ryan Reynolds.
Yes, we are.
Right after this. So, Ryan Reynolds, what do we have to say about him, Ginny?
Well, he's very good looking. Start there. He's a good actor. He's funny.
He's
funny on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, those aren't really the things we're going to be talking about.
Oh, they're not? Shoot.
They're not. As we record this is shortly after the big Peloton incident of 2021. Which
it does feel like they have an incident every year, doesn't it? There's like a big incident with them every year.
Sure. By the time you're listening to this will be, in the past, obviously, because we're recording about a month ahead of time at this point. But it's January, so that means maybe you're on your newly acquired Peloton that you got over the holidays and are applying your New Year's resolution to work out more. So maybe it's particularly timely from that perspective.
Also, if you have not seen Sex and the City and you are planning to see Sex and the City, turn this off. Turn it off. Do not listen. Come back to it later.
Yeah, I think that at this point, if you don't know, if you're in the communications and marketing space and you have no idea what went on, I'm not sure there's any hope for you. But yes, if somehow you don't know what happened, and if you happen to be inclined to watch Sex and the City, the reboot, you probably want to hold off on listening to this conversation.
Yeah, actually, as soon as it happened, I hadn't seen it yet, and I was like, nope, not looking, and I didn't until I could see the episode, and then So if you're,
I will confess, I had seen it by the time the news came out.
You had?
So yeah, so I was not blindsided by it.
Yeah, I had to keep my eyes closed because I'm very slow at TV watching, very slow at it. So, but yes. I have seen it now. We can now talk about it. We're good.
Fantastic. Well, that will make the show much more interesting because if we couldn't talk about it,
that would be terrible.
We could just sign off right now.
La, 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 la.
And then it really would depend on what actually happened, but you'd have to figure that out before we could discuss it.
I've seen it. So we're good.
All right. Anyway, so for those of you who have lived under a rock and are never going to watch Sex and the City, the reboot, basically one of the main characters rides a Peloton and dies. That's the Cliff's Note version of it. He doesn't die on the Peloton. He does his 1,000th ride or whatever and celebrates it, blah, 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 and then gets off and collapses as he's going into the shower. And then Carrie Bradshaw apparently doesn't know how to dial 911.
Right. I did that too. I was like, what? Call 9? What are you doing? He's still alive.
Yeah. I mean, it is a TV show. So, but one would hope in real life that your first inclination on seeing your significant other having a heart attack is to dial 911. Then you can comfort them and all that kind of stuff. But
correct.
Start with the 911.
Yeah, I did the same exact thing. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it doesn't seem that difficult. But so the purpose of this is not to discuss the TV show because that's really we're not an entertainment show. I mean, we do provide some entertainment, but we are not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about how this applies to agencies. And so you're sitting there saying to yourself, how on God's green earth could this have anything to do with an agency? Well, it turns out the connection to the agency world is Ryan Reynolds.
Ha! Look at that.
Wrap your mind around that one for a moment. I suspect that many of you prior to this were not aware that Ryan Reynolds has an interest in an agency because he is a man of apparently many talents. So,
Booze,
actor,
agencies,
celebrity.
yeah.
He sold his liquor company, his aviation gin, right? Was his, I think, and
Yep.
he sold that for a ton of dough. But it turns out he also has an advertising agency. And so they had been apparently pitching Peloton on work and hadn't been having a whole lot of success. And then, of course, Peloton apparently got blindsided by the fact that this major character in this prominent TV show collapses right after using their product. Not a great day for the brand.
No.
Their stock price actually plummeted, showing just how stupid people can be. Because this is a TV character having a heart attack. This is not an actual person being harmed by a defective unit or something like that.
Right.
But for some reason, the stock market said, yeah, let's just, take a chunk of their market cap out of them.
Also, you cannot have a heart attack because you had an intense workout, which this really bothers me. I know I'm not a doctor, but I am a cyclist, an avid cyclist. I race my bicycle. You cannot have a heart attack from having an intense workout.
Correct. It may be the last thing that happens before you have the heart
Correct.
attack. But
it does not cause
it's not like you wouldn't have had the heart attack if you didn't work out. Right?
It did not cause the heart attack.
It may have impacted the timing somewhat, perhaps. It doesn't matter. Anyway, again, we're not doctors. We're not. God, we're so far off the track here.
I know, but I had to say that because it really bothers me. Like, people are like, no, people are tweeting Peloton killed Mr. Big. No, that's not actually true. Peloton did not kill Mr. Big. Okay, now I'm off my soapbox. Yeah, we're good. We can talk about
Mr. Big is not real. First of all, this is a TV show. So all of the people that I've seen, being really upset about the fact it's a TV show. There is no real Mr. Big. So Mr. Big really didn't die. His character got killed off. And what killed Mr. Big was the writers, right? I mean,
fair. So that is a fair.
So you should blame the keyboard that produced the portion of the script that says Mr. Big collapses and dies. That is what killed him.
Yes.
So there we go.
I mean, it could have been Carrie Bradshaw not calling 911 that killed him, but here we are back to not talking about the agency.
But if Carrie Bradshaw had called 911, they would have said, "This is a TV show. What are you doing bothering us?" So anyway, all right. Wow, I feel like, since this is the last recording we're doing for the year, our minds have gone to mush and we're
very punchy. We're very punchy. I love it.
Who knows whether you'll ever hear this episode, because we may just throw it out for being so far off. Anyway, Ryan Reynolds has an agency.
Ryan Reynolds. He has an agency, yes.
They decide to rejuvenate their conversations with Peloton by calling up Peloton and saying, hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds, and I've got this pretty cool idea for how you can address this problem. And so they pulled together for Peloton in less than 48 hours, a 30-second ad spot that featured Mr. Big and the Peloton instructor, who was also had a cameo in the episode. So they used that in a humorous way to, I guess, try to undo some of the damage, if you will. And I thought they did a pretty nice job.
I thought they did too. Although, as we were talking about this before we hit record, you had a good point in that not everybody is Ryan Reynolds. Not everybody can call Mr. Big, Chris Noth, and get him on in front of a camera within 24 hours to create a 30-second ad. So let's caveat that. But I think it's a really good lesson from an agency perspective for two reasons. One, to be really responsive and from a client perspective, be thinking about, are there opportunities for you to take something and turn it into something else? I think it's a great crisis management example, because in most cases, at least from a comms perspective, when you have a crisis like that, where your stock price drops because of, a mention, quote unquote, killing a character on a TV show because of your product. Usually what you would do is you'd go on the defensive and you'd get, you'd have doctors out there, and they did some of this too, but then you'd have doctors out there saying that that's not true. Like, you would do all of that. But the idea that they came up with this unspoiler alert spot within 48 hours and sort of undid the damage that way, I think is really smart.
Well, and it completely changed the narrative too, right? Because before that ad dropped on YouTube, the conversation was, could Peloton sue? Would Peloton sue HBO for, misappropriating their brand, even though apparently they gave some level of authorization. Maybe they forgot to say, hey, by the way, how are you going to use our product?
Can we see the script?
Can we see the script?
Yeah.
So that is also a good agency lesson. If you are doing a deal with an influencer, a TV show, a YouTube channel, and someone says, hey, can we use your brand? Maybe ask how.
Yeah.
Maybe don't assume that it's going to be in a positive light. And I'm sure that Peloton, I'm sure whoever the poor brand manager is at Peloton who signed off on this assumed, hey, how could they use us in a bad way?
Right.
Turns out they could.
Yeah.
Now, you could also argue that that's maybe a little bit of a dirty pool by the TV show to ask someone if they can use their brand and not tell them they're using it in kind of a negative way. I mean, that is kind of, I think, a crappy thing for the producers to do.
Yeah, I think so too.
But, it is what it is. So, that's lesson one, is that you need to make sure that as you're cutting these kinds of deals, which are becoming a lot more common today, right? Because traditional advertising, traditional media, those aren't working the same way that they did 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Sure.
So agencies are coming up with more creative ways to work with a wider variety of people to get brands out there and get attention. Make sure you understand how it's being used, make sure you understand what the downside risks are and be prepared for them. So that's, I think, lesson number one out of this.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And we've been involved in quite a few partnerships at a really high level that we wouldn't necessarily be doing or will have done, even 2 or 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And you have to understand that. So everything that I read about it said that they gave permission for HBO to use the name, and they gave permission for the product to be featured, but HBO didn't pay for the product placement. Peloton didn't give them the bike. So there was this gray area where HBO was kind of like, well, we're not going to release the script because we don't want it. We don't want it to be a surprise. And Peloton was like, okay.
Right. Yeah. Retrospect, I'm sure that they wish they had asked, although, maybe lemon's out of lemonade here, or lemonade out of lemons rather. Maybe it turns out okay for them in the end because of what Ryan Reynolds and his agency did. But you can't assume that that's going to be the case. And so you need to be asking those questions and making sure that you're
covered and
you're covered.
And,
I mean, and those are reasonable questions to ask. So I would imagine that whoever signed off on this for Peloton has had some uncomfortable days.
Yeah.
Whether that's someone in-house or an agency or a little bit of both.
It's not been a good week for them.
Not been a good week for them. And I feel for them, but I would not be surprised if some people lost their jobs at the end of the day because of this.
I would not be surprised either.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine taking a massive hit to your stock and not seeking retribution on some employee. Sucks. It's the way corporate America works.
It is. So that's a really great lesson, number one. Number two is we talked about a little bit, but the idea that you're responsive for your clients. So if there's an opportunity for you to make lemonade out of lemons, like they have done with their Unspoiler Alert, I think that's a really good lesson as well. Like think about things differently and sort of creatively so that you can take a little bit of risk to change the narrative. It's a really great way to do that.
And as an agency, it's your job to help the client avoid being angry and defensive, which is typically the first reaction to something like this.
Yep.
Right. I mean, chances are when Peloton first heard this, some exec was sitting there and pounding on his desk and saying, "Oh my God, this is ridiculous," and who let this happen, and and lashing out, and that's a natural reaction. You as the agency need to be the cooler head.
Right.
You need to be counseling them to say, hold on, let's take a look at this. How can we address this? And in this particular case, there was a really creative way. That may not always be possible because maybe there isn't that particular path ahead of you. And maybe you don't have Ryan Reynolds to pick up the phone and get this done in 4 hours.
But I think the third thing is, and you raised this at the beginning, which is they had been talking to Peloton because I think I've got it open here. I think like 2018, maybe. They had done a spoof. Ryan Reynolds and his agency had done a spoof on Peloton. And because, first of all, I think Peloton was angry at first, but then they started to have the conversation with them. And they were in the process of either talking to them about whether or not they were going to become their agency.
Right.
I don't think they had been hired yet, but it sounds like from the media reports that relationship, like the conversation had gone a little bit stale. And so they used this as an opportunity to get back into their good graces and reignite that conversation. Whether or not Peloton paid for that ad, I couldn't find any information about that, but they did get back in the good graces of Peloton and reignited that conversation again. So I think there's an opportunity for us as agency owners to think about it from that perspective too.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a question I get asked a lot by clients, and I'm sure you do as well. This prospect is ghosting me. I can't get them to, to talk. They seemed interested, and now they've gone silent, or they're really slow in reviewing the proposal, or those kinds of things. And so, obviously, you don't have these opportunities in every case, and you want to be a little bit careful about manufacturing opportunities. But if an actual opportunity presents itself like this one did, that is a prime opportunity for you to step out as an agency and say, look, this is something we can help you with, and not, set aside the conversation about whatever else you were already working with them on, right? Don't try to make it, don't say, hey, if you sign this deal, we can help you with this.
Right.
Say, hey, look, I've got an idea. And, and maybe we can work together on this one particular thing and prove ourselves, if you will. And those are opportunities that you should be looking for with your clients, with your prospects, because it can be a good way to either get new business, to grow an account, or frankly, just to help retain some business if it's an existing client.
Absolutely. And, I don't by any stretch of the imagination, I think you would agree with this, think that you should be giving away free ideas or doing free ads, to reignite that conversation. But you absolutely could go back to them and say, hey, saw this happen, have an idea. Can we talk about how we might be able to get this done together? I don't see any problem with that.
Yeah, and it is a balancing act, because you don't want to be too coy about it, right? And so you have to walk a fine line here. And if it's just a brilliant brainstorm that you got in 30 seconds, I'm a lot more willing to say, sure, give that idea away, right? Because what I have always said is that ideas, are a dime a dozen. It's the execution that matters.
Yep.
And so if you didn't spend a whole lot of time coming up with the idea, don't spend a whole lot of time protecting it. Particularly if you can use it to advance a relationship. I would much rather use it in that fashion and view it as an investment in the relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think they did a really nice job with this. We'll have to link to the, on spoiler alert, if you've not seen it, the YouTube video that they put together. It's good. And they did it in a really tasteful way. I think that, to your point, has changed the conversation.
Yeah, and I think I thought it was funny the way that they wind up where they're basically talking about how Mr. Big led an unhealthy life, and that's probably what killed him. Which was, I mean, that was consistent with Peloton's initial statement after that, which actually was a pretty good immediate press reaction.
Yeah.
Right. That Mr. Big drinks a lot of martinis, eats a lot of steaks, had
smokes a lot of cigars.
Previous heart attack, I guess, on the show. I didn't remember that, but it's been a long time. So
yeah.
Yeah. So, I think the bottom line is that, agencies have a lot more opportunities in front of them than they realize with prospects and clients. And, you need to be tasteful about these things, but you can often find ways to turn a crisis to your advantage, as long as it doesn't appear like you're taking advantage of the prospect or client.
Yeah, I think you can be, and people know if you're being disingenuous or you're trying to take advantage. People know. So if you're genuine about it and it truly is a great idea that you can help them turn it around, I see no reason you can't bring that to the forefront.
Yeah. And the only other asterisk or fine print that I'd provide to this is keep in mind that anytime you're doing something that is funny, you're taking a much larger risk.
Fair.
So
yep.
in this particular case, I mean, you're talking about, Ryan Reynolds and other folks who have a pretty good, finger on the pulse for this kind of thing. Be a little bit cautious whenever you're suggesting a funny response, because funny doesn't always land the way that you think it will. And so it is something that you want to be a little bit careful about. And so you also need to think about context. In this case, humor works in part because this is a TV show.
Right? He's not a real person.
If this had been a real person who died after being on a Peloton, no matter how unhealthy they might have been,
not the same
thing.
Correct.
Right. So context matters.
Yeah.
And so just keep that in mind, because I often see people in the communication space who try to be funny, and they don't understand that humor is a much riskier proposition than being just a straight communicator.
And you also see the newsjacking where they try to lump onto something and it falls flat because it's not appropriate. It's not funny. It's none of those things. And so I would extend that advice to anytime you see something in the news that you want to lob your brand onto. No.
Well, I think the bottom line is anytime you have to try, it's probably not a good idea, right? If it comes naturally, that's fine. But like with newsjacking, if you're out looking for opportunity,
Right.
you're probably going to screw it up.
Yeah.
If you hear a story and you say, that's a perfect fit for what we're doing, that's one that's probably worth pursuing.
Yep.
So, just don't spend a lot of time hunting for these kinds of things. Make sure that they're coming along naturally.
100%.
And with that brings us to the natural end of today's episode and our discussion of Ryan Reynolds, which is the most I've ever talked about Ryan Reynolds. And until about 2 years ago, I don't think I even knew who he was. So anyway,
he's pretty funny.
And apparently a good business person too.
Yeah, great business person.
Yeah. So on that note, we will wind this episode up. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it depends.